Hello, everyone. This is James Nussbaumer, and I'm here again for another weekly session of answering questions to my Facebook people, who I'm just thrilled with the questions I'm getting. I want to respond to Jerry and Evelyn Grigsby in the Napa Valley area of California, Northern California, which I really would love to get to one of these days and visit out that way. And if I do, I can stop in and see you, Jerry and Evelyn. But um, everyone knows that I'm the author of The Master of Everything, a story of mankind in the world of illusion we call life, and its second book, Mastering Your Own Spiritual Freedom, both Volume 1 and Volume 2, published by Ozark Mountain Publishing Company and on sale everywhere books are sold. But they are taken from the principles contained in A Course in Miracles that I'm very fond of and is my lifelong study now, and I've been at it now about 10 years. And I want to first of all say that A Course in Miracles is not a religion. It's not a cult. For a cult needs to have an idol or a guru, and there's none of that. And A Course in Miracles doesn't require that you send it any money, because it's not an organization. It's just called A Course in Miracles. It's a psychological psychotherapy, spiritual psychotherapy for the mind to understand and reinterpret traditional ways of the way we see God and Christ. And so the reason that this video here is I've gotten a lot of questions about, what do you really mean about the Christ mind, Jim, that A Course in Miracles talks about, is the messages I'm getting from Jerry and Evelyn and a few others too. I can't mention all the other names, but so I'll just address Jerry and Evelyn here and all those other people that wanted to know the same too. Sometimes I get messages and I don't know who the people's names are. They're not personal, just kind of quick little messages. And I appreciate that too. I appreciate any kind of messages. But what is the Christ mind? What do you mean by the Christ mind? Because we're so used to thinking of Christ as a body, as a man that once lived. We'd say Jesus Christ. Yes, Jesus, a man that walked this world. Yes, he was Jesus Christ. Absolutely, he was Jesus Christ. But he isn't the only one that's Christ. And that's what he meant was, think like me, think like the Christ that I am as well. And so the Christ is in us all. It's the spirit that we all share, that we all see in each other. It's the goodness that we share. It's the non-judgment that we share. It's when we can overlook the illusions, overlook the things that we don't really mean to be doing, the judgment, all the things that we really don't want to be doing, the conflict, that thing beyond all that conflict and judgment, that's Christ. That's where we really are. And that's when we're smiling with joy all the time. And just like right now, as I'm talking to you, I got a little bit of a glow about me because I'm thrilled to answer these questions to the people that really want to know. They're not asking me this question, what do I mean by the Christ mind that I write about in my book, The Master of Everything. And in the second book here, Mastering Your Own Spiritual Freedom, there's a chapter in here about the Antichrist. So I urge you to buy both books. So I'm telling you, I'm getting letters and actual letters from the U.S. Post Office, believe it or not, too, from people, and emails and messages on Facebook and several tweets and notifications on Twitter that my books are a page turner. But the word needs to get out there. So anyways, what do we mean by the Christ mind? And A Course in Miracles teaches us to understand the oneness of we are in its psychotherapy, spiritual psychotherapy type of content. Very psychological content is what A Course in Miracles is about. But it's for us to understand Christianity, not really Christianity, but oneness. Whether you don't need to be a Christian to understand A Course in Miracles. It's not about Christianity, but it uses Christianity type terms like Holy Spirit and Christ to make us understand. So it's not Christianity, what A Course in Miracles is trying to teach us. It's more psychological, spiritual psychotherapy. And what I mean by psychotherapy is transforming our mind to understand who we are to the core about us. So to answer your question about what is the Christ mind, really, how can I explain it? And another, Frida, I'm looking here at Frida and Rebecca, sisters in near Albuquerque area in New Mexico, wanted to know a little bit more about my prison experiences. They're adding more on here, but to keep it short. And so I thought I'd put this together, which is taken a little bit from my book, and maybe this can explain a little bit. I'll share something about an incident that happened. You know, I spent 8 years in prison for a foolish securities violation. And so this may sum everything up and help everyone to understand what is the Christ mind, and I'll use an example of when I was in prison and how the Christ in all of us, when I'm looking at you right now into your eyes and you're receiving me right now, look at me into my eyes and you see the glow about me that I'm really anxious to talk to you about this. Don't you see that? Don't you see that? What you're seeing is, it's not me, my body, the Christ. I'm seeing you and you're seeing me. It's the Christ that we're sharing. It's what we want to learn off of each other. But we really don't have to learn because we are already there. What we're trying to learn is getting through the darkness to the light that we are. So what you're sensing in me, what's keeping you honed in on this, to be the interest, what makes you interested to hear what I have to say, is the Christ in you, wanting to connect with the Christ in me. So let me talk about something that you know, there was volumes upon volumes of noise throughout the prison house when I was in prison. And you know, the volumes of noise can be brutally and tearfully painful and just unbearable at times, you know, only adding to the stress that exists daily and can bring any kind of individual to his breaking point at any time. But there was one particular day I had enough. I mean, I really had enough. I felt exhausted, stressed, and just plain sick of prison life. Trying to regroup or gather oneself can be a very tough task to accomplish when surrounded by a crowd of insane jesters with lunatic talk, boisterous bellowing, and loud and evil sounding laughter echoing off the concrete black walls, just echoing everywhere. There's no place you can go to escape. You just can't get away from it. I was probably in about my 3rd year to go. I had a 10-year prison sentence. I know I said I'd done 8 years. Thanks to a forgiving judge, though, I was released. I did 8 years of 10 for a securities violation, but that's another story. But I was sentenced to 10 years, and at this point I'm talking about, I was about in my 3rd year, looking at how am I going to go through 7 more years of this. And this is at the time I was writing these books right here, and which are on sale everywhere books are sold now, and I hope you'll get a copy. But anyways, the noise was just bouncing off the cell block walls everywhere. There's no place you can go to escape it. You're either able to block it out or you just snap. The latter choice of snapping can be hazardous for your safety. There was a black man named Frank. Frank was standing at a 3-way intersection with 3 of his dudes, which are his friends, boisterously kicking it and having a good time at the footrail of my top bunk. Bottom and top bunks, I was on the top bunk. And when I say the intersection, bunk beds are in rows and in a dormitory, open dormitory type of setup with aisleways and all this. And the aisleways were considered streets, and there's intersections just like you would think, just like you would see in town, but this was rows of bunk beds, 30 inches apart, by the way. Double bunk, another 30 inches, another 30 inches, and so on. But I was on top of my bunk trying to relax the best that I could, and him and his dudes wanted to kick it at the end of my bed, carrying on, and I was trying to rest. I had blinders over my eyes to keep the light out and to obscure the rays from the overhead mercury lights that just come down over big, huge mercury lights that come down. Or like, it was kind of like on my top bunk. I was really kind of like being under a tanning bed is really what it was like. But it's serious. It was really that bad. And you always had to wear blinders and, a little piece of cloth that would just go over your eyes that you could get someone who knew how to sew and considered themselves to be kind of a tailor, so to speak, would make you for a fee, of course, would make you a set of blinders, and I always made sure I had them. But I was wearing my headphones too, big cupped headphones over my ears with a little radio, a little portable radio, only about this size, pocket-sized radio that they sold in the commissary that I was able to get. And luckily, where I was at in Nelsonville, Ohio, a little small town in southern Ohio, they had a 24-hour jazz station going on at that time, and so I would listen to that jazz radio station, and I couldn't hear the music on normal volume setting on my radio. It was so loud at that point when Frank and his dudes were hanging at the end of my bed, and just the roar in the air. It wasn't just him and his friends. It was all around the whole cell block area. And one of Frank's dudes, they call them dudes, your associates in prison are called your dudes. So one of Frank's dudes decided to get some exercise by performing a few pull-ups at the foot rail of my bed, pulling himself up, which was shaking my bed. And of course, that bed area that's your house. That's my house. So my house or my bunk was shaking, and my mercury was climbing. I didn't need the mercury lights above me to help me with my own mercury climbing, and I couldn't get control of myself. These dudes simply would not let up, and I gave them a minute or so longer in hopes that they would move on, but no such luck. And I asked them firmly, but as politely as I possibly could, for being in prison, if they would mind moving on away from my house. Your bed is your house. That's what you call that there. And they just chose not to hear me. My bunkie was not home at the time. My bunkie is the guy down below. And so I was alone. I had the house to myself. Bunk beds. I was on the top. I was just trying to relax. I took long overdue action, and I just jumped down off the top the bunk of my bed. I got directly right in front of Frank and his 4 or 5 dudes, and I put my face within inches of Frank's face. I mean, I got right up to Frank, and I was just ready to blow. I was a tinderbox, ready to explode. They were certainly aware of the steam venting out of me. I was so hot, I did not care one bit about the possibility of me being hurt or whatever consequences would happen. I was completely aware that this could mean big-time injury for me, but plus about 60 days in the hole if I would get in any kind of a confrontation with them, a fight, and I didn't want to go to the hole. That's another experience. Maybe another video I'll make someday about that. But Frank and his dudes knew things were looking kind of ugly. And since there was a group of them, it would be me looking ugly when this was over, because they would have just pulverized me, and I would have ended up in the hospital, and then after the hospital, then being in the hole. But that wasn't the case. And I really did not care anyway. I was kind of hoping that I really didn't care. I just lost it. I said enough was enough, and I got right in their face. And I was at my limit, and, okay, maybe I could say it was my ego's limit. But just before I was about to utter some spontaneous prison profanity into Frank's ears and expecting the worst, Frank spouted out to me some of his own choice prison verbiage. Then he, along with his dudes, turned and walked away. Nothing further happened. I found myself with a pounding heart and gasping for air, trying to breathe thank God nothing happened here. And a huge lump in my throat gave me a thankful sigh of relief, and coupled with disbelief that I just acted that way. I was not lying on the floor, and I was thanking God for that. And otherwise I would have been waiting for medics to arrive to take me to the hospital, like I'd said. But later that day, still carrying around inside me a bit of steam or stress, or an unknown ill feeling. It's an unknown ill feeling that prison life just gives to anyone that's behind bars. I did the right-minded thing, and I went to the yard for a brisk walk. And I say right-minded, meaning, still the cloud covered my mind of the ego that we all have, the ego-based mind. It was, I was still kind of operating from the cloud cover, but I knew that I needed to get to the light, and that's right-minded thinking, to sense that and know that that's the direction that you need to take. So I went for a brisk walk in the prison yard. The yard was open, and I was able to do that. I needed to calm down. The yard was usually very, very noisy all the time, but for some reason this day it was unusually quiet. Only a few inmates were out there, but due to some on and off rain that was coming down, so I was enjoying the space in the yard, and just that hint of privacy of just only a few people in the yard, other than the normal kind of shoulder to shoulder, in the yard kind of a thing, and which was extremely rare to have a little bit of privacy out in the yard. And I almost had the entire huge yard to myself, really kind of an unheard of luxury. The more I walked, the calmer I became. I started power walking. I always was a jogger, but I just was power walking that day. And I thought to myself, this is probably as good as it gets in here in prison. And I continued to feel myself coming alive as the blood was pumping through my veins and through my heart. And this was a feeling I had always enjoyed in my younger days when I was jogging. I used to jog a lot, routinely, 5 days a week before I went to prison. So, I kept the pace moving with my power walking and was reminiscing on those old days of jogging, but the blood was coming through me and pumping through my veins, and those endorphins were, from exercise were coming through, and they were calming me down, and I was starting to feel good. As I circled the yard, which was about 1/4 of a mile, I approached a set of concrete benches where I saw Frank sitting alone. All of the 2,500 inmates in this prison, it had to be Frank sitting there immediately, and I immediately thought to myself that he had to be looking for me. I was approaching the area up above. There was Frank, and I was coming around a bend, and I noticed it was him sitting there, and I'm like, oh no, there's going to be a confrontation here. But as I drew closer, I noticed that he was sitting with his head down on his lap with his arms crossed over his knees. Something told me to just keep up with my pace. And as I passed Frank, I realized that he was crying, actually sobbing. I kept to my pace and stuck to my own business, which is really the prison technique for avoiding trouble. My initial thought poured quickly into my mind that it had to be something to do with our episode earlier that day. But with this type of sobbing, I soon dismissed any like thoughts. But I was kind of thinking, maybe he was upset. Did I hurt his feelings? Or no, that can't be, I would tell myself. Well, clearly whatever was wrong, it was very serious, I could tell. My next lap coming around the yard again, Frank had raised his head, revealing his teary, swollen eyes and the red, flustered look on his face, and he was staring directly at me. He seemed lost and confused, as if he needed some help. I saw no anger in him, only just despair is all I could see. So I knew that I was safe. I knew he wasn't out to get me. It was like he was asking for help in a certain way. Well, this time there was that something inside me, something in me told me to stop and say a few words. But what would I say? I quickly asked myself. I calmly said to him something like this: "Hey man, when I got in your face earlier, I was filled with stress and anxiety, and from all this prison crap, I lost it. I just lost my cool." And he responded before I could even continue to say any more words. He responded to me in an emotionally drained way. He said, "Hey, dude, it ain't no thing at all. Not to worry. Okay, okay," he muttered. "Don't worry." He muttered again. "Don't worry, my friend, don't worry." Frank harshly added that he had more to worry about than just this prison thing. He went on to tell me that just about a half hour before we were in the yard there, that the prison chaplain had informed him that yesterday his 62-year-old mother had been killed in a car accident. It turns out she was taking care of his 2 teenage daughters while he was serving his 10 years in prison. He had already served 3 years, about the same time as where I was at. We were at about that same time limit. And the remaining 7 years were mandatory. He had no chance of getting an early release. It seems the mother of his 2 daughters, which was not his ex-wife, he never married her, but the mother of the 2 daughters was nowhere to be found and had been missing for 6 years. So his own mother was taking care of his 2 daughters while he was away in prison. The family had presumed her to be deceased, the wife. Not the wife, but his daughter's mother. But there were no other family members to take in his daughters at all. And so, who were at the moment, his mom died, and he was like, "What am I going to do?" So he was like, I couldn't help it. I had to sit there and talk with him. "What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" Well, Frank accepted my concerned gesture and simply just listening for a little bit, like I had explained. And for about maybe 10 minutes, I had listened to him, and I let him talk. And as he gave me a nod of his head, I mumbled lightly to him, and which was the thing to do in prison. And I said, "I'm very sorry." And I had to walk off. I had to leave, because you just can't hang around with anybody for too long. And it's just the way prison is. You can't be with someone for too long like that. So I talked with him, and I began to walk off. But when I stopped to look back at him, only a few feet away, he added again, and he kind of shouted over to me, "Hey, dude, back at your bunk today, when you got mad at me and my dudes standing there by your bunk, don't worry, you passed the test." He nodded again and then said, "You're okay, dude. I mean it. You're okay. I like you. You're a good dude." I simply nodded back to him and gave him a thumbs up and said, "Good luck to you, Frank. I wish you the best." And I proceeded with my laps around the yard. There was really nothing else for me to say, nor was I supposed to in a situation like that. But I did understand why he and his dudes felt they needed to test me. I'm not a threat to them any longer. In as the way I was thinking at that time, I was trying to mull this over my mind. But if you've ever been in prison, then you would really understand what I'm trying to say. But the connection that we had when he was in despair and was leaning on me, and I was listening to him, that essence, the essence between us there, between my listening, the essence, the true essence between my listening and between him talking to me about his mother dying and his 2 daughters out there, that essence, that connection was the Christ mind. Thank you.